from Mike Perry, and yet Nate continues to survive, but for how much longer?
I'm going to call time, check it out. I'm going to call time and then check it out, okay? Yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on it, and then I'm going to call time.
He was covered in blood. Not at the end of the fight, not in the final round. In the middle of round 2, with Mike Perry standing over him throwing elbows and uppercuts in combinations that connected one after another, Nate Diaz's face had already turned into something that looked like it belonged in a horror film. His forehead split open, his eyes puffed, a crimson mask that had become a signature image across a 21-year career spreading across his face. One more time, and Nate Diaz did not go down. He stood there, swaying, throwing back, refusing to go down, fighting the only way he has ever known how to fight, forward, bleeding, refusing to quit. But this time, something was different. Something in the way he moved, slower than before, heavier on his feet, reacting a half-second late to shots he would have slipped 10 years ago, told everyone watching that what they were seeing was not just a fight. It was the end of something. When the corner threw in the towel, Diaz grabbed the microphone and said something that the MMA world will not forget for a long time.
Yeah, I have blood in my eyes. I couldn't see shit. I wasn't gonna do nothing, so it's all good. But I'll be here till the end of time, and next time he ain't gonna be able to do nothing.
Stay with me, because the full story of what happened to Nate Diaz at 40 is not just about one bad night. It is about a man who was once the most dangerous upset in the sport, and what the years, the losses, and the long road away from the top actually did to him. Before we get into how it all fell apart, you have to understand exactly how high Nate Diaz once was, because the downfall only hits as hard as the peak that came before it. Diaz was born on April 16, 1985 in Stockton, California. He won the Ultimate Fighter 5 in 2007, spent 15 years in the UFC, and accumulated 16 post-fight bonuses, tied for second most in the history of the organization. But none of that tells you what Nate Diaz actually was at his peak. March 5th, 2016 tells you. UFC 196, Las Vegas. Conor McGregor, the most hyped, most talked about, most feared striker in the sport, stepped in on short notice against Diaz at 170 pounds. McGregor was supposed to walk through him.
UFC 196 taking place tonight from the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. The main event, Conor McGregor against Nate Diaz in welterweight action. And
every analyst, every media outlet, every betting line said the same thing. Diaz was a warm body, a name. A man who had no business sharing a cage with the man who had just knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds. In the second round, Nate Diaz rear naked choked Conor McGregor into unconsciousness. Commentators were speechless. Dana White sat cage-side with an expression that had no name.
You might never see him again. He made so much money tonight. You might never see Nate Diaz ever again. Somebody asked him, what are you going to do with your money? He said, I'm buying a yacht. So he might be going out to sea, and it might be the end of Nate Diaz.
McGregor, the man who had told the world he would run through Diaz in the first round, tapped out on the canvas of the MGM Grand Garden Arena while Diaz squeezed the life out of a submission nobody saw coming. Diaz stood up and threw double birds at the crowd and the cameras, and the entire narrative that had written him off before the opening bell.
12 seconds of round number 2. Declaring the winner by submission due to a rear naked choke, Nate Diaz!
UFC 202, the rematch 5 months later, generated 1.6 million pay-per-view buys, one of the largest numbers in UFC history at the time, not because of McGregor alone, because of Diaz. That is where Nate Diaz was in 2016. That is the peak. And the reason it matters is because of how far what came after sits from that moment. Because the distance between submitting Conor McGregor at UFC 196 and getting stopped by your own corner on a Netflix card in 2026 is not just a timeline. It is the full weight of 10 years of a body being asked to produce what a mind refuses to stop demanding. What happened after is the part nobody wants to talk about. After the McGregor rematch, Diaz did not fight for 3 years. 3 years, contract disputes, sitting out, watching the division move on without him. When he finally came back in August 2019 against Anthony Pettis, he won. But the inactivity had already started to show in how he moved and how he was being matched. Then came UFC 244, November 2nd, 2019. Madison Square Garden, Jorge Masvidal ran across the cage and threw a flying knee that connected on Diaz's temple in the 3rd round. Doctors stopped the fight. Diaz did not agree. It did not matter, he had been knocked out on one of the biggest stages in the world, and then it got worse. June 12, 2021, UFC 263. Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards over 5 rounds. Edwards did not hurt Diaz in any dramatic highlight reel way. He simply outworked him. For 5 complete rounds, he was faster. He was more technical. He was sharper on the feet and stronger in the clinch, and better in every measurable category across 25 minutes of professional fighting. There was no moment where the crowd held its breath and wondered if Stockton magic was about to happen one more time. Just 25 minutes of a man being outperformed by a younger, faster, more current version of what elite welterweight fighting looks like. The scorecards were not close. All 3 judges gave it to Edwards comfortably. When the final bell rang, Diaz walked back to his corner and sat down. This is the hinge moment of Nate Diaz's entire downfall. Not the Masvidal knockout, not the Mike Perry stoppage. The Leon Edwards decision is where you can look back now and see exactly when the gap between who Nate Diaz used to be and who he was becoming became impossible to ignore. He was not hurt, he was not unlucky. He was simply outclassed for 5 rounds by a man operating at a level Diaz could no longer reach. He lost, and the sport, which had been built in part on the back of his rivalry with McGregor, which had generated some of its biggest pay-per-view numbers because of his name, quietly moved past him like he had never been there at all. September 10th, 2022, UFC 2079, the final fight of his UFC contract. He submitted Tony Ferguson in round 4 and walked to the microphone and declared he was leaving to conquer another sport. It sounded like a man in control of his story. What came next showed that he was not. August 5th, 2023. American Airlines Center in Dallas. Jake Paul and Nate Diaz, the man who had rear-naked choked Conor McGregor, who had taken Masvidal's flying knee and kept talking, who had been in more brutal fights than most people will witness in a lifetime of watching this sport, lost to a YouTube personality by scores of 98-91 on all 3 judges' cards. Let that sink in. 98-91. That is not a competitive loss. That is not a man who fought hard and came up short against a skilled opponent. That is 10 rounds of being outboxed by a man who taught himself to fight as a hobby, against a career professional who had been competing since 2004. That scoreline is the most damning number in Nate Diaz's entire career. More damning than the Masvidal knockout. More damning than any loss inside the UFC. Because it told the truth about where he was physically in a way the cage had never quite forced him to confront before. He came back, June 1st, 2024. Masvidal in boxing. 10 rounds, majority decision. Nate Diaz won. And afterward he said, "I got plans on doing a lot more in the next 10 years, no matter where it is." It should have been inspiring. And in the moment, it was. But for anyone paying close attention, anyone who had watched the Edwards fight, who had seen the 98-91 scorecards against Paul, who had tracked what the years and the inactivity and the accumulated damage were doing to the physical tools that Diaz's entire game was built on. It was also the sound of a man who genuinely could not see what everyone watching could clearly see. The clock was not stopping. The body was not resetting. The speed was not going to hold the door open indefinitely. Now, here is where it gets genuinely hard to watch. MVP MMA 1, May 16th, 2026, Into a Dome in Inglewood, California. Netflix's first ever live MMA broadcast. Nate Diaz, 41 years old, returning to MMA after 4 years away. The opponent was Mike Perry, Not a top contender. Not a ranked fighter. Not someone who would have been on the radar for a Nate Diaz fight at any point during the peak years. Mike Perry, bare-knuckle brawler, a man whose last MMA win had come in June 2020 against a fighter named Mickey Gall, was the level of opponent they gave Nate Diaz for his return to the sport. That booking alone, before a single punch was thrown, told you exactly where the sport had quietly placed Nate Diaz in the hierarchy of people who mattered. And from the opening seconds, it was clear the 4 years had taken something that training could not replace. Diaz broke his finger in the first 2 seconds. Perry came forward with elbows and uppercuts and body shots and did not stop. By the end of round 1, the blood had started. By round 2, Diaz's face was unrecognizable. Perry fired a knee at the end of the round that sent him stumbling. A man who had once submitted Conor McGregor surviving on muscle memory and nothing else. The corner made the decision his heart never would have. They threw in the towel. The man who had thrown double birds at the world after choking out McGregor in 2016 was stopped in 2 rounds by a man who had not won an MMA fight in 6 years. Stopped by his own corner, covered in blood, on a Netflix card, 41 years old. And then Diaz grabbed the microphone. He said, "I think I broke my finger in the first 2 seconds. Ain't nobody beating me twice." The same fire, the same Stockton refusal, the same voice that had told the world after McGregor that none of these other fighters know how to do it. Still burning, still certain, still completely unable to accept a reality that his body had been confirming for years. But this time the words landed differently. Not because of what he said, because of what everyone watching could see behind the words. Here is what the full picture tells you. 16 UFC post-fight bonuses, 1.6 million pay-per-view buys for UFC 202, a submission win over the biggest star in the sport's history, a man who was, for one specific window of time, the most compelling fighter alive. And the last image the sport now has of him is a face full of blood on a Netflix co-main event. Stopped in 2 rounds by a man who had not won an MMA fight in 6 years, while a corner that loves him makes the call he would never have the heart to make for himself. That image, that specific, painful, undeniable image, is what a decade of refusing to accept the truth looks like when it finally catches up with you all at once. That gap between the double birds at UFC 196 and the corner towel coming in at MVP MMA 1 is the full and painful story of what happened to Nate Diaz at 40. Not one bad night. 10 years of a body being asked to do things it could no longer do, by a mind that refused to accept the answer it kept being given. That is not a villain's story. That is not even a tragedy in the traditional sense of the word. That is what happens when the most stubborn man in the history of combat sports refuses to let go of what he was, and the sport finally, quietly lets go for him. So where does Nate Diaz go from here? The rematch with Mike Perry is already being talked about. Diaz demanded it. Perry agreed. If it gets made, it happens in late 2026 or early 2027. And if Diaz wins, the McGregor trilogy, the fight that has been waiting since 2016, comes back louder than ever. McGregor is fighting Max Holloway at UFC 329 on July 11th. A McGregor win makes the trilogy the most demanded fight in the sport. But the honest answer to where Diaz goes from here is this: nobody knows. Because Nate Diaz has never once done what anyone expected. Nate Diaz's road ahead will be long. Longer than his body wants. Longer than his corner will always allow. But the same man who walked into UFC 196 as a replacement opponent and walked out, having submitted the most dangerous fighter alive, has never once accepted a story that did not end on his terms. The question is whether the terms he is willing to accept and what his body can still deliver are the same thing anymore. Which part of this story hit you the hardest? A. The Leon Edwards fight. 5 rounds of being outclassed without a single dramatic moment. Being the real beginning of the end, long before anyone was willing to say it out loud. B. The 98-91 scorecards against Jake Paul. The most damning number in Nate Diaz's career. Not a knockout, Not a stoppage, 10 rounds of being outboxed by a man who learned to fight on YouTube. C. The corner throwing in the towel at MVP MMA 1. The people who love Nate Diaz most being the ones who finally had to make the call he never would have made for himself. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And before you leave, like this video and subscribe to MMA Rivals so you never miss the next ones.